Do you believe in God? Despite that belief, do you find yourself struggling with anger, depression, sadness, and feelings of worthlessness? Do you or a loved one have COVID-19? Did you have a loved one that unfortunately and tragically died from COVID-19? Are you angry about it? Are you not understanding how that could be the case if God exists because you have a belief in God? So if all that's the case, then I think this video series is for you. So welcome to episode 5 of Soul Snacks video series, where we've been focusing on the book, The Universal Garden of Emunah, written by Rabbi Shalom Arush, which is a book that aims to deepen our understanding of what it means to have faith in God. Emunah, that word, that's the ancient biblical word, Hebrew word, for a deep, unshakable faith in God. Once again, I want to give my standard caveat. I know it's been a while since we've done these videos, and I apologize for that. It's been a long summer and a long year. 2020 was a year a lot of us would like to forget about, but as we know, everything comes from God and everything's for a reason. So we have to look to ourselves and try to look inward and look outward and try to figure out what's going on within the context of Emunah. So, but once again, I do want to give my standard caveat that if you're an atheist, this video series I'm not judging you in any way. This video series is probably not for you. I'd simply ask that you please not use this space to leave comments or try to convince folks that that there's no God. That's fine, if you believe that, but this is not the place to have that kind of discussion. There's many other platforms and spaces online for that particular discussion. This is not one of them. Also a reminder that, this video series is not an attempt by any means to capture all of what Rabbi Arush says in this book. I mean, the Universal Garden of Emunah is a book that is extremely rich spiritually. All through the book, there's deep insights almost on every page. So I'm certainly not a rabbi or a priest or an imam or a pastor. I'm not qualified in the least, really, other than being maybe an attorney and have some skill at communicating. The only purpose in doing this is try to give folks some idea what I see as, maybe some of the highlights of the book to give you maybe some motivation to go and hopefully get a copy of the book and read it. And that brings us to our final little piece of housekeeping, which is that all you have to do to get a copy of the book for free is to give us a call at the number of the screen or email us, and we'll be happy to go ahead and get you a free copy of the Universal Garden of Emunah. The one thing is that you need to reside in Virginia, North Carolina. That's our kind of geographical limit on that. So anyway, last time, let's dive right in. Last time, we were at the last part of chapter 3 of the book, and we talked about the spiritual advantages of going through life being appreciative of what you have and not being disgruntled. By being disgruntled and unappreciative, what you're doing is you're really failing to draw down blessing from above. Because what's happening is it's causing you to be sad or frustrated, and that's really not something we want to do. You're supposed to go through life being appreciative of what you have and therefore being happy, really. We talked about the allegory of a bus trip that Rabbi Arush gave us. You're on the bus trip and all the passengers on the bus are heading to the same place. But what kind of passenger are you going to be? Are you going to be the one who's like a bundle of nerves the whole time? Or are you going to be the one who enjoys the trip and trusts that the expert driver, in our case, that driver is God, driving us through our life, who knows what he's doing and has our best interests at heart. So let's jump right into chapter 4. That's where we want to go now. And Rabbi Arush starts off chapter 4 with a great statement that really sums up a lot of the chapter and what he's going to talk about. And that is that the world and your life experiences in it are a classroom of Emunah. Since the entire purpose of life is to learn Emunah, to learn deep, unshakable faith in God, then literally the things that happen to us each day are tests of Emunah, right? So I should also mention there are a lot of these tests in life that he goes through in the book. He gives very specific examples in this chapter, and the chapter 4 is 80 pages long. So just like last time, we're going to split this chapter up into 2 parts. We're going to cover about half of it this time and half of it on another video in episode 6. So Arush then dives into an example right toward the beginning of the chapter of a state trooper who pulls you over, probably for speeding or some other offense. And so what are your feelings at that moment? You see those flashing lights, behind you and those blue lights. And like most of us, you got a lot of emotions popping up, and probably a lot of expletives are coming out of your mouth too. And so you're probably, most folks are just, either going to be like, what an idiot, you're talking to yourself, and what a moron, why wasn't I paying attention? Or you're like mad at the cop already, and you're maybe thinking about getting ready for battle with this cop and giving a piece of your mind and really letting him have it, and arguing with him, or maybe flattering him or something like that. So, right, Arush brings this example as another test, really, because at the end of the day, as we know, as we talked about on page 59, everything comes from God. So who sent this police officer? I might say, well, I was speeding. No. At the end of the day, God sent this police officer to pull you over. Okay? And this test, like everything else in life, is from God, and we got to use the principles of Emunah that we learned back on page 59. So, number one, the current predicament is from God, right? Whether we're speeding or not, that really doesn't matter. God's the one who sent this state trooper. So, everything is from God. That's principle one, right? Principle two was you want to know that everything that God does is for our ultimate good. So there's some good that's some message that God's trying to give you out of this situation where you're getting a speeding ticket. And number three, you want to believe that everything has a specific purpose. And maybe, it's up to you to figure out what that purpose is. It could be that there was something that you did and you need to do a little soul searching and figure out what is it that I need to do. So, that's the correct response to the trooper situation, to the speeding ticket situation. And, we're talking about doing prayer and soul searching and asking God to forgive you and really trying to figure out what have I done here to deserve this ticket? Because, in a way, and when you say, how could it be good? You say, well, how could it be good? Well, perhaps, we have this concept that, there's some things that are like an atonement for something else. In other words, something much worse could have happened to you than the speeding ticket, or God forbid, one of your kids or your family. And God chose this method to have you sort of introspect and say, okay, where am I screwing up here? And in other words, had he not intervened with the speeding ticket, something else may have occurred that would have been worse. Certainly, Rabbi Arush goes on this situation. What you don't want to do is bring down bad judgments. There are a lot of sins that you could commit by going the other way. For instance, you're insulting the cop. It's a sin to insult people, certainly. Okay, you're harboring ill will. You're taking revenge. You're trying to flatter the cop and get out of it that way. Bribery. And plus you're angry. All of these in the classical spiritual thought of the Bible are considered really sins. And so now you've drawn down. Not only have you not taken advantage of the situation and tried to elevate yourself through the concept of Emunah, but you brought down like worse judgments against you. Something worse may happen because you've now engaged in all these bad things and just gone a negative way that you shouldn't have gone. So and with this, Rabbi Arush tells us that many of the issues that we face in life really can be avoided. And not only this kind of thing, but a lot of these kind of judgments can be avoided by giving the proper measure of charity, which everybody knows, and classically, tends to be is 10% of your income, right? So he tells a story of a famous rabbi back in Roman times who had a nephew who he had a dream that was going to lose a certain amount of money that year. So he, wanted to tell the nephew, kept trying to tell the nephew, look, you have to give charity, and kept trying to prod him to do that. And he knew exactly what he was going to lose. But by the end of the year came, he was 17 dinars, or that was the unit of measurement that they used then for money, short of the amount of charity that he knew that he had to give to avoid the loss. And sure enough, when the tax collector comes, 17 dinars that he owed. If he would have given just 17 dinars more of charity, he would have owed nothing. So this is a good example of how charity can really keep you out of loss and keep your head above water in terms of many judgments being against you. Another example that he gives of a difficult test of Emunah is the example of a court case and prison time. And these things also don't happen for no reason. Some people may be wrongly accused, but even that, and wrongly accused and wrongly convicted, but even that is a judgment from heaven. It's a judgment from God. And why does God do this to a person? In most cases, we know that everything has a purpose. Again, you got to plug it into the rules of Emunah. That perhaps it's because it's time to reflect again and use that time for something great. Best example of this is the righteous Joseph, who's in the Bible in the Old Testament. As many of you know, in the Bible, he's imprisoned after being wrongly accused of molesting Pharaoh's wife, and he ends up going to prison. But what does he do in prison? He actually is dancing around in prison and has a cheery disposition all the time, so much so that the warden puts him in charge of the whole place. And that, in turn, leads to his, a couple of years later, his quick, he gets to pull out of prison very fast, and then he becomes the ruler of the most powerful nation in the world at the time, the superpower of the world. He's second in command of Egypt. Okay, and then the whole story goes after that, and he saves all of Egypt from famine and all this kind of stuff. Had he not had that cheery disposition, even though it looked hopeless, he was in prison, he was in a terrible place, he would not have gone on to achieve what he achieved in his life. And the same goes for many great people, as Rabbi Arush brings out, many great people who've had to spend time in prison during their lives. He gives the example, Gandhi, Martin Luther King Jr., Nelson Mandela, and Rabbi Nathan of Breslov, and many others who went on to greatness, after spending some time in prison and having a chance to reflect. So then Rabbi Arush moves on to another example, which is a great, one of the worst tests of Emunah and hardest tests of Emunah, which is illness, sickness, which of course is very relevant right now as we're continuing to go through this horrible pandemic. No less than anybody else, though, a sick person has to also use the three principles of Emunah, which are, again, God makes a person sick. How does a person get sick? It's from God. At the end of the day, you can attribute all kind of natural causes to it, but really underlying all that is from God. Number two, really, the illness is for the ultimate benefit, your ultimate benefit in some way. It's up to you to try to figure that out. And three, God wants the person, it has a specific purpose. He wants the person, again, to engage in this process of self-reflection and make amends to whatever bad choices they may have made in their life. But he points out that, even though all that's true, it doesn't mean we don't have the right or actually the obligation to use all proper means that we're given with doctors and with nurses and our healthcare providers to try to get better and alleviate suffering. There's nothing wrong with that. But at the end of the day, he says on page 123, sickness is directly rooted in a person's misdeeds. Make no mistake about it. It's hard to hear that sometimes, but it is. And, this is not something that a medical professional is going to really take into account, right? It's not going to sit there and, well, what did you do? Go through it with you. Only you can do that. Okay, let's look through the last year and what's your behavior been, what you've been doing, what have you been doing, what haven't you been doing? He's not going to do this soul searching. You're going to have to do that on your own. And so no doctor or medical professional, as he says, can overcome the divine decree. I mean, God has decided this is the way it's going to be. Your illness is going to last for this length of time, and that's it. Or it's going to last for this length of time, or you're going to die at this time, or God forbid, or not die at this time, God forbid. That's up to God. And the only way that can be altered, that decree can be altered, it really is to, as Rabbi Arush mentions, is for penitence, which, it's kind of a way of saying, trying to return to God, really, is what it really means. And prayer, of course, and charity. All three of those things, returning to God, prayer, and charity, reflecting on your misdeeds and trying to correct them, prayer and charity, those are the ways that you get better. Of course, you want to use the natural means as well in conjunction with that, but at the root of it all really comes from the lack of Emunah and some misdeeds you may have done somewhere down the line. Now, Rabbi Arush then goes on to a very odd concept, which is very hard for many people to accept. Certainly the Western mind just can't grasp this. Very hard. And that is that he says we should actually thank God for the illness. And he gives an example. It just sounds crazy to most people, but he gives an example of many people that he's counseled. One in particular that he says this guy got cancer, and he counseled this person to thank God every day for the cancer, and pray to God and work to get better, and reflect. And sure enough, the guy of course thought he was crazy at first, but within a month, the cancer that had really riddled his body had regressed almost completely, and then he had a full recovery. Now, just another thing on illness, and I'm going to go off script here, because I think it's something that pops up in a lot of people's minds when they hear about illness. And that is, what about children? What do children, children, don't have any transgressions, really. A young child, how can they have any transgressions? So how can you say that transgressions cause illness? You're talking about an innocent child. And I would a couple of things. I would refer you back to, if you haven't listened to it yet, it's worthwhile going back to episode 2, when we talked about on page 47. We talked about on page 47 this example of this murdered child in a community, and the whole thing that went on the other side of the tapestry, so to speak, as to why, sort of the explanation as to why this happened, okay, and what this meant for this community, and what this did for this community, the tragic sacrifice of this child. That's one potential explanation. Another one is, sometimes God, I think, and again, I'm speaking more for myself now, and I don't know, I can't speak for everybody, and I certainly can't speak for Rabbi Arush on this, but I think he would probably say on this part, sometimes God affects those in your life, not just you, to also bring you to reflection and also bring you back, because perhaps you'll change your behavior and raise your child in a better way because you made a change that is now beneficial. You made a spiritual change in your life that is now beneficial for your child. And of course, you continue to pray for the recovery, work for their recovery. But now, since you made that spiritual change as a result of your child's illness, they'll have a better upbringing. And that is something that needed to happen. And perhaps, you left God with no other option. With all this being said about Emunah, and how Emunah is the real cure for illness, he goes on to say, Rabbi Arush goes on to say that how doctors and nurses really have a very lofty and compassionate task helping people get better. But what they got to be careful about is not becoming arrogant, okay, or give family members or patients feelings of hopelessness. This is the worst thing they can do. You hear about these doctors that come in and they deliver these hopeless prognoses. They really are robbing the family of the cure, the ability to heal, because really only God knows, as I said before, only God knows the date of somebody's ultimate demise. And if that's the case, how can anybody who's just a mortal as opposed to God presume that they know what God has in mind for this person? And there are many, many stories of miraculous things happening. So, what about families, though? But he says, what about families? You'll have these families that come in and they demand to know the truth from the doctors. We want to know, how long does he have? This kind of thing. So there's a way to say things. According to natural circumstances, the situation does seem very critical. But at the same time, experience shows us that divine intervention can alter things in an instant. So, what people do with that is up to them. But, the implication is, you want to pray, you want to give charity, you want to reflect. And hopefully everybody working together will help someone get better. The main thing that he gives over here about being illness is just not to blindly trust the doctors and the health professionals. Yes, have them work on it, but apply the principles of Emunah at every turn. All right. So another test of Emunah that he goes on to next is the mental health, and emotional health. Now he clarifies, or Rabbi Arush clarifies, he's not talking about somebody that's born with some serious mental deficiency, something like that. He's talking about people that over time, they're born relatively normal, and over time, they develop these fears, these fears, the anxieties, these depressions, listen, really at the end of the day, a person, with Emunah and somebody who prays like a half hour a day and has faith in God, they don't have anything to fear because they have that deep connection with God, and they know that God's kind of he's driving the bus, and they really don't have anything to worry about. So another thing he talks about, what are some other tests of Emunah that he gives? Another thing he talks about is the world we live in now. All these terrible images that are available to us at all times, and specifically he mentions pornography, it's pervasive. So, it's become so much easier to poison one's mind than it is to even poison one's body now. So, he talks about, that's another violation really of Emunah. Clearly, in everything we know about spirituality, God wants us to stay far away from these things. It's a test. It's certainly another test of Emunah because it's hard. These things are all around us, and whether in a softer form or a much one of these really bad websites that are available out there is hard. But this is something we have to do if we want to stay pure and do what God wants us to do. God wants us to guard our eyes against these sorts of things. Now, then he comes to another one of the hardest tests. And he spends a lot of time on this because it's often on everyone's mind, and that is earning a livelihood. As with everything else, the quality of a person's livelihood really depends on his trust in God, right? His or her trust in God. So like anything else, when you suffer a financial loss, you've got to plug it in to those three principles of Emunah that we have talked about back on page 59. Again, everything comes from God, including the loss, right? 2, this particular loss is for the best, just like everything else that God does. And number 3, the financial loss is a message from heaven, right? To stimulate self-evaluation and soul-searching for something that needs to be corrected. And that's up to you to figure out. Because, as we know, as he says many times, there are no tribulations without some sort of transgression. And now he takes a look at people who take the opposite approach. They say, no, this is wrong, and they have complaints, and some of them will do illegal things to obtain money. They'll work overtime at the office, spend time away from their family. This is the wrong approach. Certainly the Bible says, right, that we're supposed to work by the sweat of our brow, as everybody knows, right? But attributing your success really to anything but God is wrong. What you do by attributing your success to just you or some other natural, or your lack of success to something other than God, is that you amplify this kind of curse that came from the time of Adam and Eve, where we were supposed to work by this, earn our living by the sweat of our brow. You amplify that, okay? But when you have faith in God, you get around it. And that's really what Rabbi Arush talks about on page 140. He says, yes, we should pray, but should you pray for actually earning more money? He says that's really not what you should pray for. If you're talking about increasing your ability to earn a livelihood, what you really want to do is, if everything depends on your faith and the strength of your emunah and the strength of your faith, then really what you want to do is pray to God that he help you increase that, right? That he help you increase your connection to him and your faith in God. And because that's the root of the problem that has to be fixed. Now, sometimes we worry about finances, but Rabbi Arush brings out that worry about finances and trust in God are really mutually exclusive. They're not going to stay, they can't exist together. So, it's just like children. Children are not worried about, when we're going to pay, how we're going to pay the mortgage most of the time. They're sitting in their sandbox, they're happy, they're playing, and we should be the same as far as our trust in God. God's driving the bus. He's got it. Doesn't mean you don't have to do things to earn a living, but ultimately it's up to God. So then he gives a little prayer, and then with that we're going to end until next time. And it's on page 142, and he says the following: Master of the world, there is no one else I can turn to but you, for the universe and all of its contents are yours, and you sustain all of your creations as you see fit. My livelihood is in your hands alone and not up to me. Please, beloved Father in heaven, send my livelihood as you deem fitting, and teach me how to strengthen my faith to serve you in happiness and to have absolute trust in you. And whatever way you do things, help me cling to you always. Beautiful prayer. Only when you truly accept that with complete faith in God, that can solve your income issues, your heart will be full of joy and with trust. And because we know that God always sends us a means of sustenance. Next time, we're going to delve more into this issue of trusting in God in terms of our finances. But for now, again, I'm going to reiterate, anybody, if you're living in Virginia, North Carolina, you want a copy of the book, just email us or call us at the number on the screen. Until next time, this is Joe Miller. God bless. Have a wonderful and successful year.